Hello everybody, welcome to day 13 of Sound Design September. Today I have some really cool atonal stuff for you. So the synth that we're going to be making is this one over here. And you can hear in terms of the idea of the synth sound, this is very closely related to the sound that we saw yesterday. In fact, most of the sounds that I have in here, except this ARP over here, that we're going to be taking a look at in a few days, are very similar in the idea that they're trying to do, but they all use different sound design techniques that you can potentially also combine. So that is what we'll be exploring in the upcoming few days. Now this synth over here is actually very simple. As you can see, we just have a sine wave going through a bandpass filter. You can see we have 16 voices of unison and a lot of detune over here. And then we have this LFO over here, which is modulating the level. So for anybody that knows a little bit of sound design, they would say it like, okay, how is this working? How is this setup getting you that sound? And that really has to do with what is happening on the global tab over here. As you can see, we have set the range over here to 48 semitones instead of the standard 2 semitones that you see for oscillator B here. So what that means is that the detune range is actually 4 octaves, meaning that these 16 voices over here are linearly spread over 4 octaves. So quickly to just demonstrate that, I'm already going to start by setting up the next packs that we'll be working on more later in this video. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get a basic shape sine wave over here, and we're going to turn this up to 16. Detune all the way up, and then the range all the way up. So now if we look at it on a spectrum, we get something like this. And now you can see there's potentially some cool stuff that you can also do with the detune over here. So that is something that we haven't looked at in the other patch, the one that is the example for today. But you can imagine that there's a lot of cool sound design stuff that you can do with this kind of atonal approach. The reason why it's atonal, by the way, is because with this detune so high, some of the voices are not going to be landing on the pitch that is necessarily in the key of the sound that we're working on. You can imagine 4 octaves divided by 16. Is it a nice round number even? So there are even going to be some frequencies that kind of land in between keys and that kind of stuff, which is where we get the atonal feeling. So going back to this other patch, what we see is that it's going through a bandpass filter. This bandpass filter is being modulated by this macro over here. And these two macros would be the macros that you would be automating for this patch in order to get the different tonalities that you want out of the sound. In my case, what I did is I ended up recording them with my MIDI controller. So that is something that we'll be looking at a little bit later as well. Before that, we quickly have to talk about the effects. And when it comes to the effects, there's really nothing interesting going on. We can see that we're generating a little bit more of an interesting stereo field with the hyperdimension here. And then we just have our standard delay and reverb. In this case, I went with a 1/4 dotted delay as opposed to a 1/8 dotted delay, which is kind of the standard for sidetrans, just to get a little bit of a different idea out of it. Of course, this is just going to be double the timing of 1/8 dotted. So this is still going to sound nice and psychedelic. And then of course we have a little bit of reverb and we're removing those low frequencies that we don't really want. We saw in this last patch before that if we have such a high detune that even if we're playing a fairly high frequency, if we turn up the detune, we're going to get a lot of lower frequencies as well. You can see it down here in even the sub-bass register. So that is something that we obviously don't want because we don't want that clashing with our kick and bass. Now to go from here to the original patch, what we just need to do is add our bandpass. So bandpass 24, bit of resonance, bit of drive, bit of fatness like this. And then we'll assign a macro. And then we'll assign a second macro to the pitch over here, which you can set all the way up. Let me also set this range a little bit higher like this. And then inside of Ableton, in order to automate these parameters, what we do is we click over here, configure, and then we just move both of the macros. Let me now MIDI assign here. I'm going to remove all of the bold assignments that I no longer want. Can just move one slider and another slider here. And then we exit out of MIDI mapping. And now as you can see, I can move both of the sliders and we get some movement in here. Now, in order to trigger the sound, as you can see from the other channel, we do have an arpeggiator over here. This just makes it so that it's nice 16 notes and we can just lay down one long note in the MIDI. As you can see for the MIDI note though, this is quite a high octave. And that is because the octave in this case is going to determine kind of like the midpoint of the sound. For a lot of other sounds, like say your classical FM sound or something like that, what ends up happening is that you have to have an octave which is in the 0 range. So anywhere from like D sharp 0 up until like A sharp or B0, depending on the key of your track. Of course, you can also go C1, C sharp 1, or D1, or even like D0 and maybe C sharp 0. But those tend to be keys in which psytrance isn't really written that often. But for this patch, we're not really interested in that low frequency texture, but we're more interested in getting the right tonality out of the sound in terms of where the mid position of the sound is going to be. Of course, with one of our sliders, we're going to be automating the pitch up and down. And there you can basically set the midpoint of that modulation. So let me just quickly copy over this MIDI over here, as well as the arpeggio, or the arpeggiator, as it's officially known. And now we can start to write in our automation. Before I do that though, I quickly want to remind you that if you want to use any of these patches in your own production and you don't want to make them from scratch, you can find them over on my Patreon page, which is an amazing way to support the channel. But with that out of the way, let's make sure that these two knobs are on here, that we unarm any of the tracks that we're recording to, so that we're only recording automation, and then we press play and start jamming. Now, if you get automations like this, when you have recorded them, this can be a little bit nasty to work with. So what I like to do is go in here, delete this part as well. Let's remove this point over here as well. And then I can just select an individual automation and right-click Simplify Envelope. We'll do that over here as well. This makes it a little bit easier to edit if you need to. And now, as you can hear, we have a similar sound as we saw in the example patch. Of course, we need to do a little bit of extra processing over here. So we're again going to go hyperdimension for a little bit more of an interesting stereo field. We'll add our delay over here. Let's go with a 1/8 dotted this time. We'll have to remove the lower frequencies over here, like this. And then finally, we'll add a little bit of reverb. And that's really all there is to this particular sound. Now, of course, there's a lot more things that you can do with atonality. One of the things that is interesting is actually to remove, or in this case, what we can also do is bypass this modulation on the coarse pitch. So we just set bypass over here. So you can hear that now we get a really strong atonal vibe to it, and it's not moving up and down as much. Of course, if you want, you can also go somewhere in between by just turning this amount down. Or if you want to do something like a cool pattern, what you could do is you can use another macro as the aux source. So we will use macro 3 for that. And then we can just go into the automation and say write in the 1-bar pattern. By say going up like this, maybe down here, and then back down again. And if we just duplicate this over, we're going to have more and less movement going through certain parts of the sound. So that can also be a cool idea for this type of sound. And of course, one of the other benefits that we have is now that we have 2 of these sounds, they're kind of going to combine together in interesting ways. So as you can hopefully tell, this is a very interesting technique to get a very special kind of psytrance sound. Again, both of these patches are going to be available up on my Patreon page for those that want to support me. Another way to support the channel is by watching some more of my videos. So I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.